Imagine there's this big red button sitting right in front of you.
Okay.
And if you press this button, all of the organized crime, the money laundering, the narcotics trafficking in your entire country just stops instantly.
Like, just gone.
Just gone, completely vanished. So, the question is, would you press it?
Well, yeah, obviously. I
Right.
mean, who wouldn't?
Right. But what if I told you that in a room full of highly educated, well-meaning, spiritually focused people, 99% of them flat out refuse to press it?
Wait, really? 99%?
Literally 99 out of 100.
That sounds like some kind of psychological thriller or something.
It does, but it's a completely real scenario. And it perfectly illustrates why the systems that we, complain about every single day are so incredibly difficult to dismantle.
Because we're basically trapped in a web of our own convenience.
Exactly. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today, we're taking you into the actual mechanics of that trap.
Yeah, we've got our hands on a really fascinating, highly detailed transcript from a panel discussion. It's from this YouTube channel called The New World, which translates to the New World.
Right, and it's this incredibly unique gathering. You've got American and Dutch financial and investigative experts sitting down together.
And they are laying out a very, very provocative thesis. They're talking about how global policies, so think UN agendas, massive corporate environmental mandates, central banking directives, how all of that is actively reshaping our local economies.
But, more importantly, they aren't just complaining. They're charting out a literal blueprint for how everyday citizens can push back.
But before we really get into the mechanics of how all this supposedly works, we need to lay down a clear baseline here for what our mission actually is today.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The source material we're diving into, it contains some really strong, highly politically charged viewpoints.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the people on this panel are deeply critical of global climate agendas. They fiercely criticize central banking, and they take direct aim at ESG, environmental, social, and governance investments.
Exactly. So just to be completely transparent with you, our listener, our job today isn't to take a side. We're not here to endorse a political stance or tell you what you should believe about the UN or central banks.
Right. Our mission is purely to map out the arguments. We just want to present the ideas from this fascinating source material so you can, understand the mechanics of this specific perspective.
We're basically your guides today. We're going to help you see how these experts connect the dots, whether you ultimately agree with their conclusions or not.
So to start, the core tension that they introduce right at the beginning of the material is this feeling that I think literally everyone can relate to right now. It's this feeling of total paralysis.
Oh, man, yeah.
When you're hit with relentless inflation and looming energy crises, plus the rapid expansion of digital surveillance, the default assumption is just that the game is completely rigged.
Right. You, as an individual, have absolutely zero leverage.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because they kick off the panel by talking about this primal, almost biological urge that people have right now to just flee, to escape the system entirely.
The fight or flight response.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're dealing with massive information overload. You read the news, you watch your grocery bills double in a single year, you see your energy costs skyrocket, and the flight response just kicks in hard.
And for a lot of people, they're choosing flight. I mean, they're thinking, I'm done. I'm going to sell my house, cash out whatever I have, and just move to Paraguay or maybe Portugal or somewhere deep in Eastern Europe.
Right. It's the ultimate dream right now. Buy a plot of land way off the grid, plant a massive vegetable garden, and just disconnect completely from the Western world.
It's the myth of the ultimate escape. The prevailing logic is, well, if the system is collapsing under the sheer weight of all these bureaucratic rules and taxes and debt, the only rational move is to just step completely outside the blast radius.
You find a blank space on the map and you start over.
But, and this is key, the panel argues that this is exactly the wrong move.
Yeah, there's a Dutch investigative journalist on the panel who pushes back on this survivalist fantasy really hard.
What's her argument?
Well, she argues that moving to a foreign country where you don't intimately understand the culture and where you don't even speak the language natively just so you can, tend a garden in total isolation, that isn't a victory.
It's a retreat.
Exactly. It's essentially surrendering your home turf.
Yeah.
She says the real power lies in staying exactly where you are, leaning into your own culture, speaking your own language, and actively engaging with the system you already know.
That makes a lot of sense. Because when you look at how global policy actually functions mechanically, the whole escape theory kind of falls apart.
How so?
Well, sweeping agendas might originate in these high-level summits, right? like in Geneva or at the United Nations, but they cannot be enforced from those locations.
Oh, right. The UN doesn't have a global police force.
Exactly. They don't have agents knocking on your door to measure your carbon output. These mandates, without exception, have to be implemented locally.
So they have to, like, trickle down through all these layers of bureaucracy?
Yes, they have to hit your city council, your local zoning board, or your regional water authority. That local level is where the rubber actually meets the road.
You know, it sounds like we've basically treated our local democracy like a forgotten subscription service.
Ah, that's a great way to put it.
Like, we signed up for it decades ago, we stopped paying attention to the monthly updates, we deleted the emails without reading them, and now we're shocked at how much the terms and conditions have changed.
Right, we wake up and realize, wait, I didn't agree to these new zoning laws.
But we kind of did by simply not showing up to the meetings where they were passed. But, let me push back on this for a second, because it feels a little David and Goliath. Is it really realistic to fight a massive, well-funded global mandate at a town hall meeting in Utah or like a municipal council in the Netherlands? I mean, it feels like trying to stop a freight train by standing on the tracks with a little stop sign.
Well, that is the exact skepticism the panel addresses. And they explain it through this concept they call outsourcing democracy.
Outsourcing democracy.
Yeah. The argument isn't that a single town council can instantly veto a massive global treaty. The argument is that citizens have just become structurally lazy.
Ouch, but fair.
We've completely abandoned the unglamorous, boring work of civic maintenance. People stopped reading policy documents. We don't attend those local committee meetings on a random Tuesday night.
And that's where these global directives are quietly translated into local tax codes and building permits.
Exactly. And the source material highlights the real-world consequence of that laziness, particularly in Europe.
Right, like by the time a local resident actually notices a policy, say some new regulation that suddenly forces them to drastically change how they run their family farm or even just remodel their home, it's too late.
Yeah, they try to fight it in an administrative court. But the panel notes that in places like the Netherlands, citizens almost always lose in government courts at that late stage.
Because by the time you're standing in front of a judge, you are fighting a policy that has already passed through like a dozen bureaucratic checkpoints that literally no one bothered to scrutinize.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You had a voice 3 years ago when it was just a draft proposal in some local subcommittee, but you were asleep at the wheel.
Right. And the administrative court's job isn't to decide if a rule is actually fair. Their job is just to decide if the rule is passed legally according to the established bureaucratic process.
And usually it was.
This is where the American perspective on the panel brings in a really fascinating, like, mechanical defense. They highlight the U.S. system of dual layers of sovereignty.
Oh, right. The federal versus state dynamic.
Yeah, you don't just have a federal government dictating terms downwards. You have state sovereignty acting as this massive structural speed bump for centralized power.
And the panel features the state treasurer of Utah, who provides this absolute masterclass in how this firewall actually works in practice.
It's so interesting because in many states, you don't just have a governor who might be politically aligned with the federal government.
Right, you have independently elected officials.
A state treasurer, a state auditor, an attorney general. These people are elected directly by the citizens of that specific state.
Which means they aren't appointed by someone higher up in the political food chain who can just quietly pressure them to step in line.
Right. So they have the institutional authority to look at a federal or even a global directive and say, no, that actually doesn't work for the citizens of my state. And they have the legal teeth to back it up.
Precisely. I mean, they control state funds, they manage state contracts, and they have independent legal authority. The panel's whole thesis is that these local and state mechanisms are your ultimate defense grid.
So if you abandon them to go live in a cabin in Paraguay, you aren't outsmarting the system.
No, you are just handing over the keys to the defense grid without firing a single shot.
Wow. That's a completely different way to look at it. But, you know, having local political power doesn't mean much if your town or your state is completely broke.
That's the catch.
The politics is the where, but the money is the how, right?
Right.
You can't have true local political sovereignty if your local economy is entirely dependent on a financial system that you have zero control over.
Which is why the deep dive naturally pivots straight into the monetary system.
There's this prevailing idea in the transcript that money is the foundation of literally everything else. If the currency is corrupted, the entire society built on top of it is corrupted.
The panel views the current financial system primarily as a debt-based control mechanism.
Mm.
And there is a really striking quote shared from an Idaho representative that illustrates the mechanics of this dependency beautifully.
Oh, the 19 cents quote.
Yes. This representative noted, "Every year we send $1 to Washington and get 19 cents back."
Wait, I really need to pause on that. They send a literal dollar in taxes and only get 19 cents back in federal funding or services?
Yep.
That is a completely terrible return on investment.
It is a devastating return.
Yeah.
But here's the catch, and this is where the behavioral psychology really comes into play. When that representative suggests to his constituents that they should push back, assert their constitutional independence, and reject this federal overreach.
The constituents get nervous.
Exactly. They tell him they would rather just accept all the conditions and rules just to ensure they keep getting that 19 cents.
Because the system has engineered total reliance? Even if it's a raw deal, it's literally the only deal they know.
It's Stockholm Syndrome, financially.
It's like being at a casino where the house keeps changing the value of your chips while you are sitting right there at the table. You know you're being cheated, but you're terrified to cash out because you really need the free drinks in the hotel room they comped you.
That's a perfect analogy. And the panel points out that those 19 cents aren't even real money anymore. They're being financed with astronomical levels of new debt.
The debt has finally caught up with the Western world, and we are reaching a mathematical breaking point.
Which is exactly why that Utah perspective is so vital to the source material. Utah isn't just complaining about this debt-based casino.
Right. They are actively building a parallel financial infrastructure. This is what the panel calls the fight for sound money.
Yes, and it started a while ago. Back in 2011, Utah actually became the first state in modern history to legally recognize gold and silver as legal tender.
But they didn't just pass a symbolic law and pat themselves on the back.
No, they took it much further. In 2024, they passed a bill that allows the state treasurer to take up to 10% of the state's rainy day funds and invest it directly into physical precious metals.
A U.S. state taking its actual emergency cash reserves and converting them into physical gold. That is a massive, massive shift in how a government views the stability of its own national currency.
It really is.
But how does that actually work in practice? Because they go even further than just hoarding it in a vault, right? They passed legislation allowing state vendors to literally be paid in precious metals.
Yeah, contractors who build roads, supply technology, or provide services to the state.
Are they driving an armored truck full of gold coins to a construction site?
No. And the mechanics of this are actually brilliant because they integrate sound money with modern digital convenience.
Okay, how does that work?
The state contracts with a specific precious metals platform.
Mm.
Let's say you're a contractor and you actively choose to be paid in gold. The state of Utah wires standard U.S. dollars into your account on this designated platform.
Right.
And in the exact moment those funds clear, the platform's software automatically and instantaneously converts those dollars into physical precious metals held in a secure vault under your actual name.
Oh, wow. So the state never has to physically handle the gold, but the vendor ends up with an asset that is completely decentralized and completely disconnected from the federal debt system.
Exactly. It totally removes the friction. And the strategy, it isn't just an American phenomenon. The Dutch financial experts on the panel look at this Utah model and suggest an equally radical step for the Netherlands.
Which is completely exiting the Eurozone.
Yep, pulling the Netherlands out of the euro.
I mean, that would be a geopolitical earthquake. How do they even justify a move that massive?
The argument is purely mechanical. They assert that you simply cannot have a functional, locally tailored monetary policy if it is being dictated by a centralized authority in Frankfurt or Brussels.
Because Europe is too economically diverse.
Exactly. A central bank managing the euro has to set interest rates that somehow accommodate the booming high-tech sectors of Northern Europe and the heavily indebted, struggling economies of Southern Europe simultaneously.
It's mathematically impossible to optimize for both of those at the same time.
Exactly. So the local Dutch economy is basically always suffering in some way, just to prop up the broader centralized system.
So what is their alternative? Just going back to the guilder.
Yes. The proposition is reintroducing a parallel guilder, potentially backed by gold or a basket of tangible, real-world assets.
But, practically speaking, the friction of that would be enormous, right? How do you even transition back?
It would be tough.
Does a Dutch company exporting tulips to Germany suddenly have to price literally everything in two different currencies? How do you pay your taxes?
Oh, the transition would be undeniably messy. It would involve dual pricing systems and incredibly complex exchange rate management in the short term. But the panel's argument is about long-term survival.
Right.
They argue that the short-term friction of a currency transition is a totally necessary price to pay to avoid the long-term catastrophe of being tethered to a collapsing, centralized, debt-based euro.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because whether we're talking about Utah or the Netherlands, both the American and European experts keep hammering on one specific word: physical.
Physical gold, physical silver.
Right. Why does the physical aspect matter so much? I mean, if Utah wants exposure to gold, why not just buy paper gold futures or invest in a massive digital gold ETF? It's cheaper, it's way easier to manage. Why does it have to be a heavy, shiny rock sitting in a highly secured vault?
This raises a really vital question about the true nature of financial control. The panel points out a massive structural disconnect that has developed recently between the paper gold markets and the physical gold markets.
Okay, break that down for us.
So for decades, the financial industry treated paper gold, which is essentially just a contract promising that you own gold somewhere, as functionally identical to holding the metal itself.
Right, it was just easier.
But recently, if you look at the data, global central banks have been quietly and aggressively acquiring actual physical precious metals. They are pulling it out of the markets and hoarding it in their own sovereign vaults.
So they don't want the paper promises anymore. They want the real stuff.
Exactly. And this exposes a terrifying reality for the average investor. If you connect this to the broader picture the panel paints, they are warning that central banking institutions are using digital technology to build a system of absolute, top-down fiscal control.
Think about it mechanically, right? A digital currency, a bank deposit, or a paper futures contract. It's just an entry on a centralized ledger.
Yep, and with a single keystroke, it could be frozen, it could be seized, or its value can be manipulated to zero.
So if you step out of line politically, or honestly, if the system just needs to bail itself out, they can just turn off your access to your own wealth.
Precisely. The panel frames the holding of physical, decentralized assets as the ultimate, unhackable defense mechanism against an encroaching system of digital control.
Because if it's physical and you or your trusted local depository have direct custody of it, it cannot simply be deleted from a server in Washington or Brussels.
It exists entirely outside the matrix.
Okay, so we've established the local political battleground, and we've spent a lot of time on the need for physical, sound money to actually fund that battle. But what exactly is the threat?
Right. What are we fighting?
Yeah. If a whole state like Utah feels the need to build a literal financial fortress out of physical gold, they must see a pretty formidable weapon being aimed at them. How is this centralized control actually manifesting in the day-to-day economy?
Well, this brings the deep dive to what the panel considers the primary weapon being deployed against local businesses today: ESG.
Environmental, social, and governance scores.
Exactly. And the panel has a brilliant framing for ESG and sweeping global climate mandates. They call it a virtue veil.
A virtue veil. That's a really interesting framing. It implies that the stated moral goal is actually just camouflage for something else.
That is exactly the argument. The authorities seeking to consolidate capital and control local behavior, they understand that they cannot simply announce, hey, we're going to take your property, tell you exactly how to run your business, and limit your travel.
Right, the public would revolt instantly.
So instead, they drape these really aggressive power grabs in the language of unimpeachable moral virtue.
I mean, who could possibly be against saving the planet? Who could be against promoting diversity or ensuring corporate social justice?
It makes the mandate socially bulletproof. And the transcript shares a real-world anecdote from Utah that really grounds this in reality.
Oh, the tech company story?
Yes. There is a story about a small, independent technology company. These are just regular folks trying to keep their business afloat, make payroll, and survive in a tough economic climate.
And they need capital to grow, so they engage with a global investor.
But the investor doesn't send them a survey asking about their profit margins, their customer acquisition cost, or their product roadmap.
Which is what you expect.
Right.
All right.
Instead, they send them a massive ESG compliance survey.
And the questions on that survey completely reveal the true mechanism of control. It asked if 50% of their engineering staff were from specific underrepresented classes.
And the implicit mechanical threat there was incredibly clear. If they didn't meet that arbitrary quota, did the company have a concrete plan to fire their current, completely capable staff just to achieve it?
Which is insane for a small business. And the survey also demanded highly granular data on the company's carbon footprint, specifically tracking the air travel of their employees and the daily electricity usage of their office.
Think about the friction that introduces. The panel argues that this system forces companies to fundamentally abandon their primary economic purpose.
Right, because the purpose of a business is to generate profit by providing valuable, efficient goods and services to society.
But if a business is forced by its capital providers to prioritize arbitrary political compliance over innovation, merit, and efficiency, the panelists liken this to a massive misallocation of capital.
They argue this isn't just bad for business, it's dangerous. The Utah State Treasurer points out that this exact type of top-down bureaucratic misallocation of resources is precisely what sank the economy of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. You stop building what people actually need, and you start building exactly what the bureaucrats demand.
And we see the exact same mechanics playing out in Europe. The Dutch experts note that this isn't isolated to, like, Silicon Valley tech startups.
No, in the Netherlands, this exact ESG mechanism is severely impacting their major national pension funds.
And these funds are the absolute bedrock of financial security for everyday Dutch citizens.
But lately, they have been significantly underperforming and completely failing to keep pace with basic inflation.
Wait, how does an ESG score actually make a massive pension fund underperform mechanically? Are they just, like, picking bad stocks?
It comes down to a conflict of fiduciary duty. Historically, a fund manager is legally bound to maximize returns for the pensioners. That's their only job.
Right.
But these new ESG mandates force these managers to fundamentally alter their investment universe. They're forced to aggressively screen out highly profitable, reliable sectors like traditional energy, agriculture, or manufacturing, simply because they have bad E-scores.
So what do they buy instead?
They must funnel billions of euros into a much narrower pool of overcrowded green assets or ESG-compliant corporations.
So they are artificially restricting their own options, buying overvalued green tech, and ignoring really solid businesses just to check a compliance box.
Exactly. The compliance costs are enormous, and the returns are often much lower. The panel argues this mechanism is quietly impoverishing the everyday citizens who actually rely on those monthly checks, all hidden safely behind that virtue veil.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Because I think a lot of people listening might be thinking, wait, isn't asking a company to reduce its carbon footprint or hire a more diverse workforce just, basic modern corporate responsibility?
Sure, on the surface.
It sounds like putting healthy, locally sourced vegetables in the company cafeteria. It might be a little annoying and expensive to implement at first, but ultimately, it is better for the long-term health of everyone, right? Why frame this as some malicious Soviet-style takeover?
That is the exact pushback the panel anticipates. And it leads them to dive really deep into how language itself is being weaponized. To explain why you and the centralized institutions are entirely missing each other, they introduce a Cantonese idiom, a chicken and a duck talking.
A chicken and a duck talking, meaning like they are both making loud noises, they think they are communicating, but they are completely incapable of understanding each other.
Precisely. You think you are speaking the same language, but the definitions have been completely inverted.
Okay, give me an example.
When an everyday citizen hears the E in ESG environmental, they think it means stopping massive corporations from dumping toxic sludge into local rivers. They think it means planting trees and reducing smog. They're speaking chicken.
Makes sense.
But the central institutions and financial giants, speaking duck, define environmental in a radically different way.
Mechanically, what does their definition mean?
It means defunding the domestic oil and gas industry to force a transition to unreliable energy grids. It means implementing policies that fundamentally alter how citizens are allowed to travel, what they are allowed to eat, and exactly how they heat their homes.
Wow. And the Dutch journalist on the panel points out how the very definition of the word nature has been completely hijacked in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that part was wild.
Because everyone agrees we want to protect nature. But she notes that the bureaucratic policy definition of protecting nature has shifted. It went from responsible human stewardship to meaning the total removal of all human activity to create untouched, pristine wilderness.
Right.
And she gives this totally wild example of how this plays out mechanically on the ground. To meet the regulatory definition of restoring ancient marshes, Dutch environmental policy actually requires heavy machinery to come in and scrape off layers of fertile, healthy, biologically active topsoil.
Let that sink in. They are mechanically destroying, currently functioning fertile ecosystems in the name of a bureaucratic definition of nature that demands a specific type of historic swamp.
It's unbelievable. And the Dutch financial expert points out they have done the exact same thing with the word inflation.
Oh, yes, the definition of inflation.
Historically, mechanically, inflation meant one thing: the expansion of the money supply by the central bank. If you print more currency, the value of each individual unit drops.
It's just math.
Exactly. But over the last few decades, the definition has been subtly shifted in the public consciousness to simply mean prices going up.
Which completely removes the culpability of the central bank.
Exactly. Now, when the price of groceries or fuel skyrockets, the public views it as a mysterious, naturally occurring phenomenon like bad weather, corporate greed, or just gravity, rather than the direct mathematical result of central banks printing trillions of dollars out of thin air.
It's a brilliant sleight of hand.
Yeah.
The panel's argument is that these foundational terms are deliberately corrupted to silence dissent.
Right. If you try to argue against topsoil destruction, you are immediately labeled anti-nature.
And if you argue against ESG quotas destroying your small business, you are labeled a bad person who just hates the environment.
Which is a perfect transition into how the panel completely shreds this virtue veil. Because if these massive global institutions are going to claim that all these heavy-handed, economically destructive regulations are truly about saving the environment, then the logic has to be applied consistently in the real world.
It has to hold up.
So the hosts ask, where does this green logic completely fall apart? Where is the undeniable proof that this is a power grab and not an environmental crusade?
And the panel points directly at the data centers.
The data centers. This is where the hypocrisy becomes so glaring it is just impossible to ignore.
The source material highlights the massive aggressive rollout of roughly 5,500 data centers across the United States.
And the Utah treasurer specifically zeroes in on a project right in his own backyard. A sprawling 40,000-acre data center project in Box Elder County, Utah.
40,000 acres. That is a footprint the size of a literal city.
And what's crucial is how it was implemented. It completely bypassed standard local control and zoning through special, high-level legislation.
And mechanically, these facilities consume astronomical, almost incomprehensible amounts of water, specifically for cooling their massive server farms.
Yeah.
And they require massive, continuous draws on the local electricity grid.
Right. If a local multi-generational dairy farmer uses a fraction of a percent of that water to keep their cattle alive, they are hit with massive fines, told they're destroying the planet, and their business is slowly regulated into bankruptcy just to meet a municipal climate goal.
But a multi-trillion-dollar tech giant wants to drop a 40,000-acre server farm in the middle of a desert environment, and the bureaucratic red carpet is rolled out. The environmental impact studies magically disappear or just get rubber stamped. The speakers argue that these data centers have entirely shredded the virtue veil. It mechanically proves to them that the regulatory authorities do not actually care about resource conservation, carbon footprints, or local water tables, provided that the project serves the centralization of technological and financial power.
And we see this exact same massive contradiction playing out even more brutally in Europe.
The farmers in the Netherlands.
Yes. The Dutch experts point out that the aggressive implementation of carbon taxes and nitrogen laws isn't just slowing down the economy, it is causing the literal mechanical deindustrialization of the European continent.
These policies are actively bankrupting Dutch farmers, who, by the way, are widely recognized as some of the most efficient, technologically advanced, and environmentally conscious farmers on the planet.
And simultaneously, it is forcing heavy manufacturing to flee Europe entirely for places like China or India, where there are basically zero environmental standards.
So they are making Europe globally uncompetitive while actually increasing global emissions by outsourcing the production.
It is stunning, and the panel absolutely refuses to frame this as accidental incompetence or just poorly thought out environmental policy.
No, they frame it mechanically as a deliberate economic power grab.
The transcript even cites a really revealing quote attributed to a former chief of staff for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez regarding the Green New Deal.
Right.
The chief of staff allegedly admitted in an interview that the Green New Deal wasn't originally conceptualized as a climate policy at all. It was designed as a how-do-you-change-the-entire-economy policy.
What's fascinating here is the absolute unflinching clarity with which the panel views this dynamic. They don't see it as a good faith debate over the best way to recycle or reduce emissions.
The American financial expert on the panel frames it mathematically as an undeclared war.
She asserts that this is a deliberate divide-and-conquer strategy. The ultimate goal isn't to cool the temperature of the planet. The goal is to systematically separate local citizens from their land, their accumulated wealth, and their independent livelihoods.
All perfectly justified under the unassailable moral guise of protecting the Earth.
Exactly.
So, if this system is as oppressive, hypocritical, and economically destructive as the panel claims, why does it persist?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why haven't the masses just woken up, seen the hypocrisy of the data centers, and thrown the whole system out?
Well, this is where the deep dive gets incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah, because the panel stops pointing fingers at the UN or central bankers, and they turn the mirror directly onto us, the listeners.
They explore the most difficult truth of all, our own complicity, our own deep structural addiction to the current system.
Which brings us back to the story of the red button that we opened the show with. It is perhaps the most profound and challenging moment in the entire transcript.
I agree. The speaker shares an experience from a conference she addressed back in the year 2000. It was a gathering of about 100 people who were deeply focused on spiritual evolution, ethics, and morality.
People who considered themselves highly conscious and dedicated to bettering society.
Yeah.
The absolute good guys. The people you would genuinely want as your neighbors.
Exactly. And during her presentation, she broke down the cold, hard mechanics of how money works in organized crime.
She shared financial data suggesting that the U.S. economy was functionally laundering anywhere from $500 billion to $1 trillion of dirty money every single year.
We are talking about the proceeds from narcotics trafficking, human exploitation, illegal weapons, the absolute worst elements of humanity.
She sets up this grim reality, and then she offers this highly ethical audience a hypothetical choice.
Right. She says, imagine there is a big red button on this podium. If you come up here and press it, all hard narcotics trafficking in your city, your state, your entire country stops instantly.
Gun money laundering stops. The violence stops. Who in this room will press the button?
Out of 100 spiritually dedicated, ethically focused people, only one person raised their hand.
One person out of 100.
And when she stopped and asked the other 99 why they refused to press the button to instantly end cartel violence and massive money laundering, they were bracingly, terrifyingly honest.
What did they say?
They said, if hundreds of billions of dollars of capital instantly leaves the U.S. financial system, the stock market will take a hit, and we don't want our retirement portfolios to go down.
Wow.
Furthermore, they said, our government is dependent on borrowing massive amounts of money to fund the deficit, and if that dark liquidity vanishes, interest rates will spike, our taxes will go up, or our government-subsidized checks might stop.
So what does this all mean? It's like we're standing in our living room screaming about a massive, destructive leak in the roof, demanding that someone fix the water damage ruining our house.
Right.
But we secretly hold a high-yielding stock in the corporation that manufactures the machine causing the leak. We desperately want the water to stop, but we absolutely fundamentally refuse to let our quarterly dividends drop to pay for the repair.
The panel argues that society is suffering from a multiple personality disorder economy.
We loudly, publicly condemn the corruption of the centralized financial system. But our retirements, our 401ks, our public schools, and our daily conveniences are entirely funded by the financial returns generated by that exact same corruption.
We are addicted to the yield. We are addicted to the convenience. And this addiction creates a massive vulnerability that the centralized system exploits every single day.
And the panel provides another incredible mathematical example of how our refusal to communicate locally actively enriches the central banks at our own expense.
They talk about a concept they call the 2,000 basis point arbitrage.
Wait, before we get into the math on this, for anyone who isn't trading bonds on Wall Street every day, a basis point is just a fraction of a percent, right?
Yes, 1 basis point is 1/100th of 1%.
So 2,000 basis points is essentially a massive 20% gap. How does a gap that big even happen between regular people?
Let's trace the exact flow of the money because it explains everything. The speaker imagines 3 women living in a small, tight-knit farming community in Tennessee.
Okay, 3 friends.
They are lifelong friends. They go to the same church. Their kids play together. The first woman is running a small local business, maybe a bakery. She needs capital to keep it afloat, so she is financing her operations using a credit card from a massive centralized New York bank. and she is paying a crippling 26% interest rate.
Okay, so she is bleeding cash to Wall Street just to survive.
Right. Now, the second woman has her life savings deposited in a small local bank down the street. But that local bank doesn't keep the money in a vault. It sweeps its excess deposits up to that exact same massive New York bank overnight.
And what's she making on that?
For providing that capital, the second woman is earning maybe a 2.3% interest rate on her savings.
A tiny return.
And the third woman has her retirement money sitting in an IRA. And that IRA is heavily invested in the corporate stock of that exact same New York bank, earning maybe a 6% annual return.
Oh, I see where this is going. So you have three friends who have known each other their whole lives. Two of them are blindly handing their capital over to a distant, centralized banking conglomerate for a tiny single-digit return.
Yep.
And that centralized bank is turning around and lending their exact same capital back to their best friend at a suffocating 26% interest rate.
Precisely. The bank is capturing that massive 20% spread, the 2,000 basis points, simply acting as a middleman.
It's wild.
Now, mechanically, if those three women simply sat down at a kitchen table, talked openly about their finances, and actually trusted each other, they could cut the centralized bank out entirely.
The two women with capital could lend it directly to their friend's bakery at, say, 10% interest.
The math on that is incredible. The two lenders would instantly quadruple their return on investment, and the business owner would cut her debt burden by more than half. Everyone wins massively, except the New York bank.
So why don't they do it?
Because we have been culturally conditioned to never, ever talk about money. We don't trust our neighbors enough to underwrite a loan, but we implicitly trust a faceless institution thousands of miles away.
The centralized system profits immensely to the tune of billions of dollars a year off our lack of local trust and communication. The system doesn't just feed on our money, it feeds on our isolation.
Which brings us to the final and really most actionable phase of the panel's discussion.
Yes, because they don't just diagnose the disease and leave you feeling depressed. They offer a very specific mechanical blueprint for fighting back.
And the beauty of their solution is that it doesn't require storming a Capitol building, running for president, or moving to a survivalist cabin in the woods.
It starts incredibly, almost absurdly small.
It starts with a parking space.
Yes, the parking space rebellion. This is a story the Dutch journalist tells about Naarden, a working-class neighborhood in a Dutch town.
This specific area was bombed heavily in World War II, and the local residents literally rebuilt the streets themselves. They laid the bricks, they planted the green spaces. It is intimately their home.
But recently, the local municipality, citing a top-down mandate to address the climate crisis, announced plans to systematically remove all the street parking in this neighborhood.
The mechanical plan was to force these residents to give up their cars or park them in a dark, unsafe, distant parking garage on the edge of town, while simultaneously jacking up the permit prices.
It was a perfect, real-world microcosm of a sweeping, global agenda-removing private vehicle ownership for climate goals, clashing violently with local working-class reality.
But instead of just complaining on social media or passively accepting it, the citizens actually united. They used the power of the local.
They went door to door, they held strategy meetings in their living rooms, they created banners.
But most importantly, they organized a neighborhood walk and explicitly challenged the city officials to come out of their offices and look at the physical reality on the ground.
They walked the politicians through the streets and told them, there is no climate risk here that justifies this. This is our neighborhood. We built it with our own hands. We are not giving up our marking spaces.
And the political pressure became so intense and so highly localized that the city actually backed down.
The residents kept their parking spaces.
Now, on the surface, protecting a piece of asphalt might seem completely trivial when you are talking about global UN agendas or trillion-dollar central banks.
But the panel makes a profound structural point here. The global agenda is not implemented via one giant law. It is implemented through thousands of tiny, seemingly trivial local actions.
You win the macro war by organizing and winning the majority of those thousands of little local battles.
And winning that parking space battle does something even more important mechanically. It rebuilds the local trust that the centralized banks exploit.
Once you realize you can trust your neighbor to stand shoulder to shoulder with you against the city council over a parking space, you might actually start trusting them enough to sit at the kitchen table and talk about that 26% credit card interest rate.
The political solidarity automatically translates into economic solidarity.
The panel offers a few other incredibly practical, modern tools for organizing this local resistance.
Oh, the Utah Treasurer's AI project.
Yes. The Utah treasurer brings up a fascinating project in his state called Citizen Portal, which was started by Paul Allen, the founder of Ancestry.com.
And this addresses the outsourcing democracy problem we discussed earlier.
They use AI technology to automatically transcribe and track the audio of virtually all the public meetings happening across local governments in the state.
So instead of a citizen having to sit through a 5-hour zoning board meeting on a Tuesday night, just in case something important comes up, the AI does the listening.
Exactly. A citizen can just log in, type in a keyword like ESG, zoning, biometric data, or digital ID, and the AI flags exactly when and where those policies are being quietly discussed in committee, long before they are finalized into law.
It acts as an automated, localized early warning system.
The Dutch journalist suggests another, more analog method for this exact same concept.
She talked about local journalism, right?
Yeah, local businesses pooling just a tiny amount of money every month, maybe 50 bucks each, to fund one independent local reporter.
This person's full-time job is just to sit in every boring local committee meeting, read the dry 100-page policy drafts, and send an email alert to the community when a toxic policy is quietly moving through the pipeline.
It gives the citizens time to organize the pushback, what still actually matters, before it hits that administrative court.
And financially, the panel advocates strongly for building what they call parallel systems.
This means actively and mechanically cutting out the big banks wherever possible. It means returning to peer-to-peer finance, funding local businesses directly within your trusted network.
It means intentionally shifting your deposits to local community banks. The panel points out that the U.S. still has over 4,000 community banks, which is a massive structural asset compared to Europe's highly consolidated, top-heavy banking sector.
They even suggest that local communities should prepare backup local currencies or dual pricing systems. It is treated as a practical insurance policy.
Right. If the centralized euro or dollar system faces a massive liquidity crisis or a digital freeze, your local community already has the physical infrastructure, the physical precious metals, and the social trust to keep trading, keep the grocery stores open, and keep surviving.
But there is a lingering question here, and I know it is on the mind of anyone listening to this breakdown. The transcript makes it abundantly clear that fighting this war requires constant grinding vigilance. You have to read policy drafts, you have to attend council meetings, you have to organize your neighbors, you have to set up peer-to-peer lending networks.
That sounds exhausting. It sounds like a second full-time job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How are everyday people supposed to fight a highly funded global financial war when they are already burned out and just want to come home from work, play with their kids, watch a movie, and relax?
Right. It feels mathematically impossible to get 300 million people to suddenly care about local zoning laws.
And this is where the panel is surprisingly, strategically optimistic. They don't believe that every single person needs to become a full-time civic activist.
Really?
If you look at historical mechanics, the most successful systemic shifts in history were not driven by 100% participation. They were driven by a highly dedicated, vocal minority. The panel argues that you only need to find about 5 to 10% of the population who are truly awake to these mechanics.
Just 5 to 10%. That is a remarkably low threshold.
Yes. If you have 5 to 10% of the population who simply refuse to take the virtue veil seriously, who culturally and loudly refuse to be bullied by moral manipulation, and who actively work together to build productive local alternatives, that is enough friction to flip the entire system.
It is about a cultural shift as much as a political one.
It is about looking at the bureaucratic absurdities like destroying fertile topsoil to create a pristine swamp, or taxing a local farmer while building a 40,000-acre data center and simply laughing at it.
Refusing to comply, pointing out the naked hypocrisy, and offering a healthier, local, physical alternative.
So let's bring this all together. We started this deep dive staring at a massive, overwhelming global map, feeling the instinctual urge to run away to the woods in Paraguay, just to escape the sheer weight of it all.
But this panel of experts has taken us on a journey that completely inverts that strategy.
They showed us the mechanics of how Utah is fighting back at the state level, using physical gold and dual sovereignty as a firewall against digital centralization.
They unmasked the ESG virtue veil, explaining exactly how it functions as a mechanism for the misallocation of capital and exposing the undeniable hypocrisy of massive tech data centers getting a free pass while local agriculture is regulated out of existence.
They forced us to look in the mirror with the terrifying red button scenario, confronting our own complicity and our deep addiction to the convenience and yields of a corrupt system.
They showed us how we lose 20% of our wealth just because we refuse to talk to our neighbors.
And finally, they gave us a mechanical blueprint for micro-revolutions. Defending your parking space, using AI to track your city council, and rebuilding local trust so you can cut the mega banks out of your life.
The ultimate takeaway from this source material is that true resilience doesn't require abandoning your culture and moving to a foreign wilderness.
It requires paying fierce attention to the town hall down the street. It requires knowing the name of your city council members. And above all, it requires trusting the person living next door.
It is a radical reimagining of where true power actually lives. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final lingering thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today regarding human behavior.
The panel argues powerfully that our centralized financial and political systems survive not just through raw legislative force, but because they offer us a daily dividend of convenience. Whether it's the frictionless ease of swiping a big bank credit card, the instant nature of a digital payment, or the subsidized comfort of a government check.
Our absolute reliance on that convenience is their ultimate, unbreakable compliance mechanism.
So ask yourself this. If convenience is the chain that binds us to a system we claim to distrust, what is the very first convenience in your daily life you would be willing to give up tomorrow morning to reclaim just a fraction of your local sovereignty?
That is a question definitely worth sitting with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the map you were given, keep learning how the mechanics truly work, and above all, keep your eyes open right there in your own community.